We're going to be using this session, this hour, as a kind of break from our regular day and see if we can come here to focus on what we can do to shift that cognitive load back to our students. So if you're here, welcome. If you're just joining us, we're going to get started. You're here for a session called The Real Risk Isn't Stepping Back, It's Carrying It All Alone. And I'm going to show you how you can spot the overfunctioning, shift the load back to your students, and you're going to be leaving this session with 2 ready-to-use moves without having to overhaul your whole curriculum. But we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, welcome. Make sure you have something to write on or something to write with. I want you to think of this space right here as a thought sanctuary. So really, whatever you're doing during your day, if you're just taking your lunch break, you're here for your quick hour, uh, close your tabs on your desktop, close all the work that you've been doing. I want to start with something a little bit light. I want you to pick the dog that matches your teacher mood right now. Maybe you're calm and collected, like number 3, or maybe you're just hanging on by a thread, like poor number 6. If we're all being honest, we're kind of somewhere in between. And I will tell you that some days I am all of these in a day or all of these in a class period. So drop your number. If you want to comment, feel free. Okay. The reason I start here is because these faces really tell a bigger story. Our jobs aren't just about planning and delivering lesson plans and marking. It's also about the energy it takes to keep everything running. And when students don't step in, that energy comes from us. So today's session is a thinking, reflective space, not just a webinar. You bring your expertise of your own practice, and my role is to give you a few tools and approaches that fit your context, whether you're heading in from the classroom or maybe you're in a place of leadership, leading a team of teachers. I'm here to kind of give you ideas about how to shift that load back to students. Right now, most of us feel like students rely on us for everything, and that feels kind of heavy. Like you're carrying the whole classroom, you're doing the thinking, the deciding, and the reminding. In fact, you're probably doing the entertaining, as you can see me here in my classroom. They're waiting, you're leading, and that can be really exhausting. So I want you to think about what would happen if that shifted. What if they did step up? And what if you had a structure that supported that? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be covering today. Less push, more ownership, less chasing, more clarity, and you will be teaching in a way that actually aligns with your teacher values. If you stick with me through the whole hour, I'm going to be giving you a fresh way to see student ownership so it feels possible in your classroom right now. I'll give you a clearer picture of what might be making your teaching heavier and where students might be ready to step up. And you'll leave with 2 simple strategies that you can try immediately. These are strategies that shift the load back to students without overdoing, like redoing, overdoing your curriculum. I'm MA Skidmore. I'm a teacher, classroom teacher at heart, and I'm still in the classroom. I'm also a teaching and learning coach and a learning partner for leaders in schools. I'm also a podcast co-host. I co-host International Teacher Staff Room with my colleague Jacob, where we give advice to teachers. So if you're interested in that, check that out too. And my work is all around helping teachers build classrooms that run on student ownership, not on you as the engine or you having all the energy. So let me just tell you a little bit about how I came into this work. I'm still checking my comments, make sure nobody's trying to reach me. If you're just joining us, thank you. Thank you for joining. And you can also watch this on replay. So welcome to those people as well. How did I go from being kind of stuck in my classroom to doing things differently now? Well, I was the kind of teacher who used to give everything. I was scaffolding, differentiating, breaking things down for every student. My learning management system was full of documents, videos, resources, little quizzes and tutorials for my students. I created all those things. I was doing everything for my students, uh, because I wanted to support them, right? I wanted them to succeed and feel prepared for what's coming in the year and what's coming next for them. And I was thinking, well, if I just put more in, they're going to engage more because they're going to have what they needed. But they didn't end up stepping up. And after months and months of that and years of that, I started to feel angry towards my students, a bit resentful towards them. Why was I doing everything? And they seemed to care less than I did. I was feeling really drained. Now, behind that, there was a lot of assumptions I was making about how my students were feeling or behaving, and it was really kind of centered on me. But I realized that that anger and resentment was really a warning sign to me. And after, exploring those feelings and really working that through with a wonderful coach and some supportive colleagues, I came to the realization that the only variable in all of this scenario, the only variable that I had complete control over was myself. And so the real thing that I needed to be changing was what I was doing in the classroom. So I decided to try something different. And it kind of started, really, the ball started rolling when my colleague and I designed a reading partnership project. So in this project, there was no direct instruction to the students. They were in partners exploring a novel, a short story on their own. And we engineered that project so that the skills were designed for the students to be leading the activities. And we made that, we put it in their hands, explained it fully, and then we stepped back. We literally stood at the front of the classroom for the entirety of this project. It was like 3, 4 weeks of that project, resisting the urge to jump in. There were times that I really wanted to jump in because I thought, well, they're not going to get the content I want them to. I need to just tell them about this thing that I noticed that they may not be getting exactly correct. And my colleague just looked at me and she was like, don't you dare step in. That's the whole point of why we created this. So we waited. We watched as students were fumbling and stumbling around. And after a while, they started to figure it out. They ended up doing things that I assumed that they couldn't do. And watching them own that was electric, especially the students who were kind of the really high performers. We were watching them go further than we were off really allowing them because we had such a tight structure in our classroom, such a tight hold over doing everything. And the other notable kind of something we were noticing with our students is that even the ones that were struggling, they were able to approach in their way. And we saw students who maybe were more quiet in the class actually come alive when they were in that smaller pairing with just one other person. So we were really speechless. We were very pleasantly surprised about that. And I thought, yes, this is it. This is the classroom I want. This is the classroom that brings me my energy back. But being in the classroom, that projects like that, 3 to 4 weeks, very intense, they're really powerful, but they are not sustainable. You cannot rebuild your whole course around these projects. So I started looking for ways to implement small strategies that I could embed in my daily practice that would shift the work, the doing, the thinking, and the deciding from me back to my students. I started calling that the shift, and I've been chasing that shift ever since. I've been chasing it for myself and my own students, and I chase it now for the work teachers that I work with, and I'm chasing it for you. Really, this kind of shift is not about motivating our students. It's about sharing responsibility for learning with them. And that shift, that is the heartbeat of the work that I do with teachers now. So let's get started and I will show you what that looks like. This webinar is for you if, okay, so these are the conditions about like if you're in the right place, if you want students to think, engage, and step up. If you're tired of carrying everything by yourself. If you're open to trying some small shifts that might build a bit more independence, then you're in the right place. I tell you this because I know that this method isn't for everyone, but if you see yourself here, then this is for you. This webinar or this session really isn't for you if you're looking for a quick fix without making changes to your teaching. All of the strategies that I'm going to share with you are quick to implement, but you need to be changing the way you're approaching your teaching in order for them to work. If you believe that students just can't take responsibility for their learning, and that's just the way it is, that's just kids these days, then this webinar probably isn't for you either. If you're not willing to let go, step back of some of the control in order to let your students grow, then this won't work for you. So if you're here and you're ready to go and you're ready to see this shift, go ahead and drop in the comments, um, shift and see, and if you're ready to hear about this. I'm just going to be checking the comments to see if anybody's leaving me any questions. You can also leave me questions you can DM me with questions on LinkedIn. You can leave me a comment on the event page, whatever you like. It's often really hard to manage this session while I'm looking at comments and trying to run that. So if you're having questions, if things aren't making sense, please reach out. Fantastic. Let's get started. I want to introduce you to the big lens that we're used in this work, and it's called the Student Ownership Guide. This isn't a checklist, it's a way of seeing. And you are teachers, you already know these terms, and you're probably doing most of it. And while it will feel obvious when you see what I'm going to present to you, obvious doesn't mean that it's easy to implement into your classroom. Most of us haven't been given the space or the language to name what's really going on when our students are disengaging. And maybe you haven't had that chance to step back and see how all these factors fit together and what's actually going on with ownership engagement in your classroom. And that's what this guide is going to give you. It's a bigger picture that you can keep coming back to as you plan and reflect and build ownership into your daily practice. There are four key elements that lead to increased student ownership. And today I'm going to zoom in on just two of them: engagement and self regulation, because that's the most essential to the strategies and the work that I'm going to be sharing with you today. I'll give a quick nod to the other two so that you see the full picture, but the focus is just on these other two because we don't really have time for that. If you want all of the guide, reach out. I'm happy to share that with you and have that be your guide as you do your planning and your setting up of your next lessons. Okay. I'm going to be using the metaphor of a bike ride. I'm a lit teacher. I live in the metaphor. So everyone's ridden a bike, everyone or has seen people riding bikes. So you kind of get the idea here. And we know that in order to ride a bike, we have different pieces that work together and they have to be all working at the same time. We've got to be balanced on the bike. We've got to be fueled up in our energy. We have to be in the right gear and we have to pedal. And each one of these matters. If you think of this in your classroom, this is how it kind of looks. Your engagement, your students' engagement is like that balance. It's about staying upright on the bike. Without the balance, the bike tips over. In your classroom, students need to feel connected to the task in the moment. They need to be interested, focused, and actively involved. Otherwise, they stall. This engagement comes from feeling seen and heard, that their voices matter, from making small decisions, small choices that increase the buy-in into what you're doing. It comes from actively doing something, not just sitting, listening, or kind of copying from the board. It requires them to be thinking. And engagement comes from immediate purpose. They need to know why what they're doing right now matters right now. Like, what's this for? Right. And here's the key. The one thing I want to point out about engagement is that we're not talking, the key is that it's not in the supervisory sense. It's not the way I hear engagement being talked about in some educational arenas, right? I hear teachers, excuse me, I hear teachers talking to me, the teachers that I coach, talking to me about how people will come into their classroom to observe, maybe a supervisor, and they'll say, oh, it seemed like not all your students were engaged in that activity. They're really talking about compliance or getting things done. And The way I want you to think about engagement is really students balancing that learning experience by themselves. They are thinking, they're contributing, and they're making choices that move the learning forward. It's not about compliance, getting things done, doing what you told them to do, or just doing school, as you might have heard some people refer to. So that's the first one, engagement. And the second one is self regulation. I like to think of this as the pedaling. So no matter how well built your bike is, if the rider doesn't pedal, they're not going to be moving forward. They're going to fall over. Likewise, in learning, if students are not managing their focus, managing their effort and their persistence, that learning stalls. Now, self-regulation is something that I've been working on a lot this year. It's in the classrooms where I observe people that I coach. This is one of the areas that is most lacking, not because we don't want to, but we often feel we don't have time to do the self-regulation piece, and therefore it gets kind of dropped off in favor of content or other things. And when that happens, that's where a piece of that student ownership is missing. So it's really essential that we think more consciously about self-regulation, what that looks like in our classroom, and how we can put that in. So I'll be giving you a strategy today on that. Self-regulation is really around, and this is to remind you, because you know these things already, to remind you that it's about when students are setting their own goals, when they're tracking their progress, when they're managing their own time, their own emotions, when they can reflect on what they're learning and then make adjustments. What worked? What didn't work? And just like riding that bike, to get good at it, you need practice and endurance. And our role as teachers is really to model these strategies, to build routines so they can carry that motion forward, even when motivation dips or maybe when the tasks become harder. For example, you might help them to see what time management looks like. How do you do your own time management? Share that with your students. Show them how to do self-talk. Help them to build checklists and visual organizers. So those are the two that we're going to be working on today, as related to ownership, but there are two others as well. On this bike ride, you need fuel and you also need to be in the right gear. So if you think of motivation as the fuel, this is that quick boost, that steady nourishment that keeps students going. And motivation for students really comes from four areas. It comes from autonomy, so believing, or sorry, autonomy, so that they are having ownership, they're able to choose things, they have independence in what they're doing. It comes from this belief that they can get that done, that they are capable of doing what you're asking them to do, that if they put in the effort, they will have success. And that belief is essential to them feeling motivated to even do what you're asking them to do. They also need to feel belonging. So, are they part of that class group? Do you have a classroom that is conducive to students feeling like they're belonging to that group? And are they doing meaningful work? So, not just the meaningful work about what they are doing right now, but how is this important in their life? How does this work in their, how does this connect to things that are important to them in their world? So, that's the motivation piece, that helps with increased student ownership. And then the rigor is all about adjusting the challenge so that their effort stays steady, no matter if they're higher performing or maybe students who are struggling with certain aspects. They need to be given tasks that are adapted for them to stay steady in that effort. When we keep those in mind, we are going to build greater student ownership. Today, we're going to be focusing on engagement and self-regulation because those are kind of where ownership shows up most clearly. Just have a pause and think about those four areas. What you can even drop it in the chat if you want. Which one of these four areas do your students need most right now? Like, where do you see that? Which area do your students feel kind of weak in, or what area interests you as a teacher to explore in your classroom? If you want this full guide with the explanations kind of fleshed out and ideas for how to plan for each one of those in your classroom, send me a DM, send me a message, and I will get that to you. Apologies for that. Okay, the first one. This is a huge mindset set shift. I'm going to be presenting you with two of these. And this first one is really about shifting the thinking. And this is a mindset shift more for the teachers then it will be for your students too, but you've got to get your head around this first. I'm going to be presenting both of these strategies in the same way. I'll give you kind of what I see teachers doing that might be increasing that disengagement or the reason why your students aren't stepping up, and give you a reason for why that happens, and then the consequence for that. And then I'll show you how to shift that over. So the common teacher mistake that I see with this idea of shifting the thinking is that teachers aren't doing it because they feel like if they don't lead every step, nothing's going to happen in their classroom. Or they feel like if they don't keep things moving, the learning's going to fall apart, is going to crumble away. And this actually comes from a really good place. We care so much about student success and we want things to go smoothly for them. We don't like to see them struggling. So we step in and we end up doing that mental heavy lifting for them. We explain things before they even have had a time to think. We fill in the blank when they hesitate with an answer, and we rescue them from the hard parts of learning. But when we do that, students get used to just waiting as things get hard. They wait for us to step in because they know we will. They stop trying to think it out themselves and they rely on us to tell them what to do, how to do it, and how to think. We end up walking out of class completely drained. And it's not surprising because we've just carried the cognitive load for 22 humans. If you feel that exhaustion at the end, of your class period, that's a good clue that you need to be shifting that load over to back to your students. In fact, I felt that this week with my media comm class. I got out of there just wiped and I thought, I need to rethink that because clearly I was doing more than they were. So how do we shift that? The first thing you're going to be doing is tracking who's doing the work. In order to shift it, you've got to be able to see it. This is simple but powerful. Track who's doing the work. Instead of assuming that your students aren't ready to step up, start noticing and observing what happens in your classroom. So in your next lesson, try this. Um, I want you to stop and start counting at certain moments in the classroom. Like when you start to feel that you're doing more, I want you to count. Who's talking here? You or your students? How many times do they talk? How many times do you talk? Who's asking the questions? Who's making the decisions? I even keep a little piece of paper next to me and I have a little tally so it's easy to keep track of, right? If it's mostly you, it's your signal to step back and think about how am I going to hand that over to them? And you're going to try to pass that back to them, even if it feels awkward. It will for you and for them at the first. So you're looking for those small moments where you can pass that back to them to make them feel the weight of the task. That's the goal. They should be feeling the weight of the thinking, the uncomfortableness around having to speak or having to express their ideas. That's where the learning is going to happen. If you want to know quick ways to respond, reach out because I have a tool for this too that you can keep in your classroom on your desk. So when you start noticing that you're doing more talking, you're doing more thinking, there are quick kind of techniques that you can use to shift that back over to them. But this is the first piece. You have to see it, notice it, and be aware of what's happening in your classroom so that you then can step back and allow them to step forward. When you're tracking that, like who's doing the thinking. You're really checking the balance. If you go back to that bike ride, you're checking the balance of that bike ride. Who's balancing here? If the bike it only stays upright because you're holding on to the back of the seat, as soon as you let go, they're going to tip over. And that's what's happening here. So you want to be conscious of who's actually doing the balance on that, you or them. When students start to carry more of the cognitive load, that's them taking on the responsibility for balancing, right? Think back to your last lesson that you just taught. Maybe it was this morning, maybe it was yesterday. Who did most of the talking in that lesson? You or your students? If you want to drop me a little note, feel free. I'd love to hear. Okay. The second strategy that I'm going to talk to you about is called shifting accountability. Set that up while I check my chat, see if anybody has anything they want to communicate to me. If not, like I said, always drop me a note. I'm happy to jump on a call, explain more, or send you any resources that you see here that you want to know more about. Just reach out. I'm here to help you make that shift. Another common teacher mistake that I see, especially with regards to self-regulation, is believing that if I don't check everything, they're not going to do that work. We've all been stuck into that cycle. We chase them down, we remind them, we double check, we overtrack. I call that the spiral of death. If you're a cyclist, you know what that is. When you start pedaling harder and harder on the turbo trainer, but we're not actually moving anywhere. We're doing everything, but we're not moving that learning forward. Why do we do this? Why do we over monitor, over check? Well, because we've all been burned by that. We've trusted students to take responsibility before, and they didn't. So we tighten our grip. We fall back on reminding them, threatening them with grades, putting pressure on them, putting them in detentions, putting them in homework catch up because they're not doing the prep work or they're not taking ownership of their own learning. And the real consequence with allowing this accountability not to be in the hands of students, the consequence of you continuing to over check and really monitor is that we carry the accountability for success completely on our own. Students never learn to manage their own time. They never learn to manage their own effort, emotions, or even their own progress. And we get stuck in this exhausting loop of chasing tracking instead of doing the teaching, which what we really want to do. In fact, this piece was confirmed to me again yesterday. I had two students come back to visit me. We had a little chat over coffee. They're in their second year of university, and I asked them, what is the one thing that you wish that you had learned or gotten from your high school experience before going on? And both of them said, I wish our teachers would have let us do a little bit more of the thinking and planning or the deciding or the, taking a little bit more on ourselves. We needed that responsibility and we weren't given it. Our hands were held a little bit too much. That's what they told me. They didn't use all the language I'm using here, but essentially they were telling me that same thing. And that just confirms to me that this is absolutely a necessity for our students, no matter what level you teach. So how are we going to build that? How are we going to do this self-regulation in our classrooms? We may not be able to do it all at once, but we need to be consciously thinking about places that we can put it into our practice. Real accountability doesn't come from having control over your classroom. It comes from students reflecting and taking ownership. And our job isn't to check every detail. It's to build a system that lets students practice accountability for themselves. Let me repeat that. It is not our job to check every detail on our students, even though you may feel that way because you're constantly reporting out on grades, attendance, behavior, etc. Our job is to build the systems that let students practice accountability for themselves. Here's something really quick that any of us can do in our classroom next class, no prep. End with a responsibility reflection. You're going to ask a question to your students. They can answer on sticky notes. They can answer in a Microsoft form. That's my favorite because then I can read them later on. What did I take responsibility for today? Have them answer that and then supercharge that with What will I take responsibility for tomorrow? This could be about the learning, the content. It could be about how they collaborated with a colleague. It could be about their behavior, about how focused they were on the lesson, or even how they used their time. It doesn't matter. You know your students, ask them questions that where you know you're seeing struggles. What matters is that you're building a habit of self-checking and you're not chasing them down to do it. When you end your class with responsibility reflection, you're helping students practice that pedaling on their own. They're not waiting for you to hold the back and push them forward. They're actually moving themselves, right? And that is the self-regulation piece that is so vital to student ownership. Let me show you a quick example of how this works in a real classroom. This is the one I just gave, I don't know, a couple weeks ago to my students. And you can see on the top, these are the first question answers, and then the bottom are the second question. So look at this one. Today, I took responsibility for making my own twist in interpreting a poem and trusting it. Typically, I end up trusting someone else's ideas rather than my own in the fear of being wrong. However, today I took aspects of someone else's ideas and thoughts through their analysis and added my own. So he is absolutely where I want him in terms of reflection, right? And look at this. What is he going to take responsibility for tomorrow? We're right in the middle of reading partnerships right now. So if you look here on the bottom left, I will be responsible by knowing my book well, being ready to discuss different ideas, events, and themes. Will have had annotated the story and important moments so the minimum amount of time is lost looking for events. That student just created his own homework assignment. I don't even have to give them homework. He knows what he's supposed to be doing for the next class, right? This other one, this is Alex, I think. He was talking about how he took more responsibility in creating his goal for they were setting goals for their exam that's coming in the spring. And you can see here, he's really reflective about how he's doing and what he needs to do, right? These are just gold, 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 gold. I encourage you to do them. So those are your two strategies, shifting accountability and noticing who's doing the thinking, talking, and deciding, and shifting that quickly back to your students. I want to share a quick story with you, not to impress you, but because I think you're going to see yourself in it and you're going to see that ownership works. When you focus on this intentionally in your classroom, it does work. I'll tell you about Cheryl. She's an experienced teacher. She's a real teacher. I worked with her last year, and she has solid practice. Her classes are well planned. Her materials are strong. She came to me for some one-on-one coaching because she was noticing that her students weren't as motivated or curious as she wanted them to be. They were passive, focused only on grades. And she said to me, I'm teaching, but they're not learning. And if they're not learning, what's the point? Like she knows she's doing everything right, but she still doesn't understand why they're being like this, right? So she tried something different. Through our work together, she started to unpack her assumptions about her students and slowly shifted the design of her lessons. She started to approach ownership using the strategies that really spoke to her. She doesn't use all my strategies that I gave her, but she uses the ones that work for her in her setting. And for her, she ended up focusing more on process work versus product work. She was giving students voice and choice, and she was tying their work to purpose. And that resulted in massive shifts for her and her students. Her students started stepping up. She started feeling lighter, more energized, more hopeful. And she said, I feel like I'm teaching, not dragging. And her students were thriving. So that's what Cheryl's experience is with using these small strategies. And she's not unusual, right? She's experienced, committed, and solid in her practice, just like everybody here watching or in this live session. But she needed a structure to help her to shift the load. And that's what made the difference. The other thing that worked for her is that she didn't do it by herself. She didn't just take a bunch of PDFs and go off and do it. She had support and a space to try, to reflect, and to keep going when things got a little bit messy and didn't work out. And that's true for all of us. We don't lack learning. I can give you all my PDFs. You can read books on engagement and ownership, right? So you know what to do. You've even sat in PD sessions where they're telling you, your PD days at school about how to do it. What really works to make sure that ownership gets into your classroom is that you need to find the time and space to actually apply these strategies while still covering content, managing behavior, and keeping everything moving. We don't have time to just stop and do only ownership. So often that's the point where confidence starts dipping when you're running out of time, and so we just try to go it alone and fix it alone. I'm pretty sure you're here because you know that there has to be a different way to bring ownership in your classroom, and you don't want to keep carrying it alone. So that's also just not you. It's the number one question I get from teachers. How do I actually get students to take ownership without losing control of my classroom, without losing time on my content and my curriculum, and without burning myself out? And that's why I jumped in. I had to help in that situation, and I created what I call the student ownership sprint. And I want to share that with you because I think for many of you, it's exactly what you're looking for. Uh, I'll tell you a little bit about it if you bear with me. It's really a space to practice, to tinker and experiment in your own classroom in real time. And you do that with feedback and with the support of a community. So you're not carrying that alone. This is, excuse me, a 6-week online program that I built specifically for secondary teachers. You know, I am a secondary teacher. I know what we need. And so I've built it for you, exactly helping you to get ownership into your classroom. Inside the sprint, we go deep on 3 things. We start shifting that cognitive work back to the students so that you're teaching less and they're thinking more. We start creating the right conditions in your classroom so students are going to be stepping up. And then we'll talk about what to do when they push back on that, because they often do. We also work on how to make that accountability stick so that you're not monitoring and tracking all of the changes in your classroom. And the timing of this matters. The next sprint that I'm running starts on October 8th and it runs to November 12th. For people in my part of the world, that gives you space to test, to adjust, and to head into winter break confident that you are building ownership into your classroom. You're not crawling to the finish line, just like collapsing once the holidays come. And the best way to show you what this looks like is through the teachers who have already been in the sprint. So I ran a sprint in May, June of last year. And here's what some of these teachers said. I know Sylvanus was going to join us on this live, so I don't know if he's around. I can't see because I can't see what it's a 30-second delay and all this LinkedIn stuff. But this is what he says. He said that having intentional shifts in his practice created big changes, more student voice, clearer routines, and shared responsibility. And he was really surprised at the speed at which it started happening. So that was like week 2 of the sprint. He's already seeing big changes. This is Aveen. She also was talking during one of our coaching sessions about how she used one of my strategies called the silent start. And she was noticing them not only doing it, but when she talked to them about it, like, why are we doing this? And they said, oh, because you want us to do more of the thinking. She was like, not only are they doing it, but they notice that they're doing it as well. Right. So there you get it. Real teachers in real classrooms this past spring, summer, who saw small shifts and or used small shifts, and that changed everything for them, right? If I'm being real with you though, and so many of my colleagues, so many of my teachers tell me that they're already overwhelmed, right? We're moving into end of September. They don't have this headspace for something new, for any new learning besides what they're required to do for their exam program. And the saddest, most heartbreaking thing for me and all of that is that I know exactly what it's going to feel like if nothing changes, because that's where I was: resentful, tired, um, not knowing where to go next, and not knowing how to find the help I needed to get my students to do more, right? Fast forward 8 to 12 months from this moment. end of September in your classroom. If nothing changes, what's that going to feel like for you? I guarantee you, you're still going to be reminding students what to do every single moment of your lesson because you're the one holding it all. You're the one deciding and thinking. You're still going to be hearing things like, is this for a grade? Because they haven't learned to take responsibility for themselves. You're going to be dragging them through every lesson because that weight has never been shifted back to those students. And that is not on you as a teacher or as a human. It's a structure and a strategy issue. And that is figure outable. You can change structure and you can change strategy quite easily. And you can do that through small shifts that will bring big change in your classroom. If you join us for the sprint, here's what's on the other side of all that 6 weeks of coaching and working. We meet once a week and you try these things out in your classroom. So here's what you leave with. You have clarity about what to focus on in your classroom, and you've got some momentum because you tried it and you've had my support and the support of your community through the trying to make all of this happen. You leave with the confidence heading into the rest of the year. When you come back after that winter break, you're like, I tested these things. I tried them. I know they're going to work and I can start fresh in on the other side of that break. And most important, you are going to be walking into a classroom where your students are carrying more of the weight. And that's where you start having those light, joyful feelings that the reason you got into teaching in the first place. And that's what I designed the sprint to give you. So if you're interested in joining us for the sprint, if you want to find out more about how it works, how much it costs, when we're going, and all that stuff, you can reach out to me. I would love to hear about it. So here's information. You can go back and watch this if you want information on how to get a hold of me. You can also just DM me, send me a message today. I will jump on a call. I have a little bit of marking to do, which I would rather talk to you about what's happening in your classroom than do my marking. So reach out. I'd love for you to set up a call with me in about 20 minutes. We will be able to see whether the sprint is something that will work for you. And regardless of whether you join or not, you're going to leave that call with a clear picture of what your next steps are. In that call, we'll talk about like, what's your classroom look like now? Where is it feeling heavy? Where are your students already just ripe for stepping in? Okay, so you can book that call with me. I'm happy to talk to you. I'd love to hear about your classroom and give you some maybe some more background, more information on the strategies that I've shared with you today. Um, I hope you enjoyed this session. I hope I see you using these in your classroom and that you reach out to me and tell me how it went. Did they work? Did they not work? I'm guaranteeing you they're going to work. Whatever it is, just reach out, make a comment, and let me know how things are going. But have a great rest of your day. I don't even know what time it is. Oh, I'm getting you out under an hour. So you can go finish off your lunch, finish your tea, whatever you need to do, and get back into that classroom. And please try responsibility, reflection, or try just noticing. Notice when you step back into your classroom this afternoon, notice what's going on there. But I'll see you again soon. Thanks for joining, everyone. And let's catch up on LinkedIn.